Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And joining me today is another author that I had the privilege of meeting at this past LA Festival of Books. Now, my guest today is the author of the urban fantasy series Cascade Saga and Crimson Trilogy, and the dark urban fantasy series Moonlight Territory. Her horror stories have been published in various magazines, anthologies, e-zines, and websites. As a hopeless wanderer, she has traveled extensively with pen, notebook, and camera in hand. And drawing from her experiences, she creates her characters and the worlds they live in. She resides in sunny California with her family and Liska, a German shepherd, and her trusty writing partner. And in today's interview, my fellow writers, we'll be talking about the Cascade Saga, which I'm so excited to dive into with you all here. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, author Monica A. Kastle. Monica, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Awesome, Monica. I'm so excited to have you here and ask you so many questions about the Cascade Saga and many more. Before we dive into your series, is there anything you would like to add to your bio? Anything that your fans and readers may not know about you?
Well, the Cascade Saga takes place in Northern California, and I'm originally from Northern California, so that's where that originated at.
Alrighty. And for viewers now learning about this series, what can you tell them about the world you have created with the Cascade Saga and the Crimson Trilogy?
It was once magic died out. It's free, it's coming back. And so the pack has to deal with the relationship between humans and magic born as the world changes around them.
Ooh, nice. And that's also the same world of the Moonlight Territory, or a different series altogether?
That's a different series altogether.
Awesome. And for the first one, Bone Chimes, as a little window on what people can expect from this first book, what can you tell us the main characters in Bone Chimes?
Jordan and Rutger are the main characters, and Jordan has been living as a rogue for a time, and she's forced back home to face, everything that she ran away from. And then from there, it goes into family drama and then romance.
Nice. Very nice. So before we dive into the creation of Bone Chimes and the grand scale of the Cascade Saga and more, let's talk a little bit more about you, Monica, and your journey of becoming an author. So walk us through it. So growing up, were you always a creative person, or did that come about later in your life?
It was very early. I don't remember a time where I wasn't creating people, places, or things, and then wanting to write them down or replicate TV shows I saw.
Awesome. So going ahead in your journey, what would you definitively say was your aha moment that really pushed you to really make the commitment to, you know what, I'm going to be an author?
I had gotten published with short horror stories early. And so it wasn't until I had the opportunity to quit my job and write full time that it was like, okay, now it's getting real. And I have to make the commitment because I just quit my job.
That's true. And
that's how Bone Chimes was born.
Oh my goodness. So from that point, now we're going to go into the creation of the Cascade Saga as well as the books in the series. So as a little icebreaker question, when you began writing this story, were you more of an author who was a planner or a spontaneous writer?
I am a spontaneous writer.
Awesome.
And it can be chaos sometimes, but we're going to see what happens.
That is true. That is very true. I've tried going down the direction of spontaneous writing. I realize it's not for me. I like to be a planner. I like to be organized. That works for me. But I have met a few authors on the show who are kind of either a mix of the two. They have a general outline,
yes,
but they just fill in the blanks, depending on how the story is going. And then from, drafting the initial idea of the Cascade Saga beginning with bone chimes, ultimately for the world itself and the story you want to tell, what was your goal as the author for this story, as well as the promise making to your fans who have been with you from your short story years to new readers now learning about you for the very first time?
Well, with Bone Chimes, it was the first novel I ever wrote. So it was exploring writing how I wanted to write it, not worrying about, because I indie published it, not worrying about what other people were going to expect. And just really wanting people to fall in love with the world and then be entertained.
Fascinating. And that is very, very true. I think absolutely at the end of the day, we want to entertain our readers. We want them to be engaged and really, really hooked in from the very beginning, which actually leads to our first fan question of the interview. So one of my viewers asked, how did you develop the idea for the overall story of the Cascade Saga?
It was really Jordan. Once I started writing her and where she was going to go with her journey, that's where everything started to change around her.
Okay, all right. And then once you figured out your stride, did you have a ritual or routine that really made you very disciplined to commit to, getting this book finished, at least the rough draft, and then going to the next stage and the next stage after?
I I have an office. I've been blessed enough to have my own office. And so when I get up in the morning, I get my coffee and I go straight to my office. I turn my Pandora on and I sit down with my computer.
Nice, nice. Me, I am more of a kind of like a night owl. I like to write in the evening, but I'm trying to stop myself from writing too late into the night. I have on occasion written till 1 in the morning, which that's not good. It's not healthy. So I'm trying to put timers on myself. It's like, hey, you're almost nearing the end. Move away from the computer. But that's kind of like the curse of being
Yeah.
authors. We get so immersed in our stories, we can't help but continue writing.
Yeah. And you lose track of time. It's like, I
Absolutely.
came in here this morning and it's evening now. What happened?
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the whole truth? So once you figured out, okay, the idea of the story, drafting it out, as authors, as I've learned from people I've interviewed on the show thus far, it's a very solitude experience because it's just us at that point in our journey. And sometimes we're hesitant to let people know what we're working on. I've talked with people on the show who have said that they didn't tell their family and friends until after they were published that they had written a book. And sometimes they told them straight from the get-go that they were working on this. For you, Monica, when did you tell friends and family that you were embarking on this new venture of yours?
When I quit my job.
Right then and
It
there.
was like, surprise.
Oh my goodness. And I imagine, were they a little hesitant and little apprehensive to this new and sudden change? Or are they like, they understood that you being an author, made the most sense?
They were hesitant. They were very hesitant.
Mm,
And it was like, do you know what you're doing? Well, no, but we're going to give it a shot.
yes, absolutely. That is the truth for all authors. We do not know what we're doing. We're just sitting in front of our computer or we have a notepad in front of us and we're just writing along, seeing what happens. And all of that we're going to be covering in the business side of being an author. But before we get to that, so as you mentioned before, you had written short stories in the past and sort of developed your voice as an author. But when you made the decision to embark on writing novels, what was the most challenging aspect of writing a novel as opposed to writing a short story?
It's the attention span. Like, you have to really make this happen and it has to flow. There has to be a plot, it has to make sense. So that would probably, because with a short story, you can end it, and especially horror, you can end it with a cliffhanger, and that's the story. But with a novel, people want answers.
That is true. That is very, very true. And I don't get a lot of horror authors on this show. So I'm really liking this discussion on, a little bit of the horror genre, which we will be covering a little bit later. And then, of course, to add to what you said, making sure it makes sense. Sometimes we always encounter the dreaded writer's block where we have the idea in our head, we can't write it down on paper, and it infuriates us. So for you, Monica, how do you handle the writer's block?
I write something else. I leave it and I go write something else, whether it's a short story or I write dialogue or a grocery list. Just really pen and paper help me a lot.
Really? Okay. I've heard a lot of authors say the exact same thing, stepping away, writing something down, even if it's just like a few sentences or maybe a paragraph, just moving your mind away from your current project so that way you can see it again with a clearer perspective. And I have to agree. I have to 100% agree that that is very, very helpful.
Yeah, most definitely. Especially when you can just walk away from the block.
Yes, 100%. So now going forward again in your history and your journey. So after you had written the first draft of Bone Chimes and the Cascade Saga, and of course getting an editor, making sure it's polished, and publishing it, ultimately, well, actually going back a little bit, did you do any beta readers or ARC readers for
I
Bone
did.
Chimes?
I did. I had 2 for Bone Chimes.
Okay. And from those initial reactions, were they mostly positive, very critical, or somewhere down the middle?
They were somewhere down the middle. They were somewhere down the middle. They told me this doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me. You could fix or clear it up or describe it differently, rewrite it. So it was things like that. And, we like the idea, just tighten it up.
Yes, very, very true. Very, very true. And that kind of leads into the next fan question, which is, of course, how did you develop the main characters in Bone Chimes?
Jordan was pretty easy. I had an idea of her for a long time. And so it was going to be, I love photography. I made her a photographer, and so that was fun. I was like, oh, this is going to be cute. And then with Rudger, the male protagonist, I kind of wanted this gruff, grumpy, kind of trapped in his family kind of feel. So that's how they came about.
All right. And that kind of actually leads to the next fan question, which is, so using those two characters as an example, how did you make them feel authentic and yet complex to your story? Because I think that's a very important question to ask, because ultimately you want engaging characters, but you want characters that make sense for the story and the world
Correct.
you are creating. So how did you go about that with your two main characters?
Well, obviously the first part, they have to stay in character. And so it takes me, anytime that I do that, I will go over like one character scene over and over again. So I know that they're staying to the character, and I have to remind myself, don't get too wild and crazy with them.
Mhm.
And because they're both going to have emotional reactions to whatever's going on in the scene. And it's keeping true to those emotions. And if I have to stop and work on one, and I'll do it over and over again, and then I'll stop and work on the other one and do it over and over again, just so I know it, to me, they're staying true.
Absolutely. Very, very true. And kind of another fun little question. When you were writing Bone Chimes, do you have a favorite scene that you absolutely love to share with fans and family members and friends? And do you have a challenging scene, or I should say, did you encounter a challenging scene to write in Bone Chimes?
I would say the most fun one is when they are, because they've been separate, the character's been separated for a couple of years. When they meet back up, they're in a restaurant and they bump into each other. And both of them are just, shocked. And it's trying to write that shocked look on their face. And then, oh my gosh, he's touching me. And then, oh my gosh, I'm with her, and they haven't spoken to each other in years. So that was fun because I was like, oh, this is going to be so great.
Nice, nice. And what would you say was the most challenging scene that you wrote in Bone Chimes?
The most challenging scene, he gets kidnapped by some people, and it was trying to add the horror element without it being too much of a horror story or a horror scene. That was the most challenging one.
Could you elaborate on what you mean by a horror scene? You don't make it too like grotesque, too like
Right.
brutal.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, that is actually very, very true. And that's actually something that we're touching on a little bit later. But before we get to that, there is another question that I really want to ask you, and I really want to hear your thoughts and that is, of course, the drive, what pushes us as authors. So as I said early in the beginning of this interview, being an author is a very lonely venture initially in the beginning because it's all on us. And when we make the decision to publish our stories, it's a great feeling. And this is lead to a discussion of what it means to be an author in the digital age. Because social media is a blessing and a curse for authors. On one side, we're able to connect with fans, viewers, and fellow authors, like-minded people, and collaborate and network, and that is awesome. On the other side, we do leave ourselves, unfortunately, exposed to a lot of hate speech, trolls, negativity, spam, what have you. And that can be very detrimental to an author's mental health and overall well-being.
Yes.
And then, of course, imposter syndrome is always going to be in back of everyone's mind, and it's only heightened with social media. So for you, Monica, after you published Bone Chimes, as well as working on the next books in that series, did you ever have those moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome? And if so, or if not, what has disciplined you to continue writing and continue being a storyteller?
With it, Bone Chimes was a huge imposter syndrome months because it was the first time that I was doing it. And, there was obviously hesitation from family and friends. And so it makes you really question your life choices. Like, what am I doing here? But at the same time, I couldn't stop writing it. So obviously there's a drive, there's a passion for my characters or to tell a story. But yeah, it was a horrible time. And it's really going back and reading over it and being like, okay, I have to be the first person that has to be happy with this is me.
Yes.
If I'm not happy with it, then it needs to be put away. I'm not gonna play with that. So
you hit the nail right on the head, Monica, that as authors, we have to be passionate about our stories. And yes, the story is going to change every now and then because, we as authors change as well.
Correct.
But at the end of the day, we still have to have that passion. We still have to have that drive to be storytellers because we need to tell stories because it's in our DNA, it's in our blood, it's who we are.
Absolutely.
And this kind of leads into this next question, which is this debate of whether or not we are in a golden age or new age. And I'll give some context for this question, Monica. So I've been doing this show for about 6-7 years, give or take. And I've had the opportunity to meet so many authors. I actually had a chance to look back. 179 authors just on YouTube alone. And then on Spotify, we're looking at a good maybe 20 or 30. So almost close to 200 people that I have interviewed. And I've learned a lot from all of these people. But the one thing that I noticed, a pattern emerged. And that was a lot of these authors really found their passion or reclaimed their passion, so to speak, during the height of the lockdown years, the COVID years, with this term, COVID authors really coming about. And I can agree to that because I was one of those. I started writing my books around 2020 and professionally started, publishing my stories. And this has led to this discussion of, because of the lockdown being this breeding ground for new voices, and when the floodgates open, it just flooded the industry with new talent, whether that's editors, narrators, artists, especially authors, of whether or not, because of these new voices, we are in a golden age. Some say that we are, others say we are in a new age, more specifically an Iron Age, less shiny, but more stable. So for you, Monica, in your opinion, are we in a new age or are we in this golden age?
I want to say we're in the golden age. I'm leaning towards that because I know I wrote Bone Chimes in 2018 and followed it with the second book. But in 2020, when there was a lockdown, I wrote 2 novels that year. So, it was like, and with all those voices, I mean, how can it not be golden?
That is true. That is very, very true. And this also leads to another important question, which I think it is imperative to ask all of my authors and anyone in the publishing industry. And that is, of course, AI in the creative world. And this has been a very hot topic debate in the publishing industry. A lot of authors are using ChatGPT or some form of AI software to write stories, punching out 500,000 page novels within a few days, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
AI being used for narration, AI being used for editing, and of course, AI being used for cover art and what have you. And this has led to a lot of people really putting their foot down and saying that, this can't be allowed to go any further because AI is only going to get better with the amount of stories that it tries to copy or emulate. As one of my guests said, AI in the publishing industry creates a false sense of creativity because it mass produces what it is to be an author. And Monica, I would just love to hear your thoughts on AI in the publishing industry. Is it as terrifying as people make it out to believe, or is it, we have to acknowledge it, but it's not going to be the end all be all in the publishing industry, hopefully?
Right. No, correct. I agree. It's not going to be the end all. I don't use anything about it. I don't have any of those things. I would rather, like a book blurb is a struggle for me to write, but I'd rather sit there and struggle with it than have somebody else do it for me. And it's really just being honest to my readers. I'm not going to hand you something that somebody else created with my name on it.
That is true. That is very, very true. And probably I love this thing that one of my guests said about AI in publishing industry is that asking AI to write you a book is like asking an alcoholic seventh grader to write the book for you. It's not going to be pretty.
No.
It's going to be messy. You're going to end up being an editor, which ultimately, for anyone listening to this, that is what you're going to be. You're going to be the editor, not the author.
Right.
You're going to be polishing a program story. It's not your own story.
Well, and it doesn't have life.
Yes, very, very true. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't use AI for other aspects, like if you want to organize your characters in like a spreadsheet, absolutely.
Right.
If you want to use AI to, let's say you're struggling to make an outline and you want, let's say ChatGPT, make me an outline. That's completely fine. It just provides you a skeletal structure. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you have a story and you want to get it out at this time, that's all on you. You have to make the commitment.
And that what makes you proud of your work is I did write this story and I did get it done and I did publish it. So that's, taking pride in your work.
Very, very true. Very, very true. And before we get to the business side of being an author, there are a few more fan questions, Monica, that I would love to ask you. So, well, this actually ties in perfectly to the business portion. And this is, when you began publishing your stories, Monica, what was the most surprising aspect you learned about the publishing industry?
That you have to be on top of it. And it's like I published Bone Chimes myself and did not have a plan at all. I just wanted to write it and I wanted to publish it. That was my goal. There was no marketing plan. There was no plan. And you can tell that there was no plan. And so after that, it was like, I need to learn what this is and how to get this done.
Excellent. So after, publishing many more stories in different series, looking back on your journey thus far, what would you have done differently?
I would have taken marketing seriously and social media seriously. I'm not very good at it. And everybody can tell. And so I would have taken that much more serious and gotten into a rhythm. Instead, I'm trying to learn that now.
Absolutely. And I definitely think a lot of us authors can really admit to that because marketing and social media is probably not the biggest strong suits that we have. It is a struggle. It is. I still struggle with marketing my own stuff and putting it out in my newsletters. I'm not a big person on social media. I don't have platforms on all social media accounts. I don't like being on social media as much, but sometimes we do have to, sacrifice some things if we want
Yeah.
to really get our names out there.
Yes, that is for sure.
Excellent. And this leads into now the business side of being an author. And the first question in this segment is, of course, understanding one's audience. So, Monica, you already seems to me already had an idea of your audience from the horror short stories that you have written in the past before going into the world of novels. And I definitely think it is important as authors to really understand who it is they're writing for. Because the horror genre has so many subgenres. You have horror
Yes.
fantasy, you have erotic horror, you have spicy horror, you have any kind of horror. And then, of course, you have the different reader groups, YA, NA, AF. And ultimately, that's when you really have to figure out, okay, I've written the story. I think I have an idea of who my audience is and what group I want to market to. So, in your opinion, Monica, at what stage of the publishing journey should the author really have a good idea of their audience?
Well, I had a pretty good idea. Because it's urban fantasy. I'm a huge urban fantasy fan, and so I'm part of the audience. So I already knew who I was going to market to just from that alone, and that's what I was. And it's an adult, it's for adults, so that was easy to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this kind of leads into the next fan question. For you, Monica, are you an author who writes for your target audience or a specific readership?
I the story tells itself, and if I stay in the parameters of the urban fantasy without getting too far out of that, that for me is keeping it to my target audience.
All right, all right, excellent. And the next question following that is, of course, the balancing of our voice, but knowing our genre. And what I mean by that is ultimately we've heard numerous workshops saying, write the story that you want to write, showcase your voice, yada, 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 which is all true. But the one thing they don't add to that is know your limitations regarding your voice, because you don't want your story to be so new that it completely throws the reader off, but not so familiar or copycat like that it
Right.
appears to be someone else's story, but you just thrown your own aesthetics to it. It's this tight roping balance. So for you, Monica, writing in the urban fantasy genre, how did you balance the two?
Well, it comes down to just and that comes down to sticking to the characters. And when they're not in character, it's time for my voice to back off and then to keep them in character.
Mm-hmm. Very, very true. Absolutely very true. And this leads into another fan question, which is also very important. And that is, of course, handling critiques and reviews. And one of my commenters asked, Monica, as an author, you've written many books for different series. How do you handle criticism and or negative reviews as an author?
I take them. It depends on what's being said. And if it's just, you suck, well, okay, if you say so, but if it's like serious, these characters or the story wasn't tight or plot or whatever, okay, then I will pay attention to that. And it's a lesson learned, and I'll do better on the next one.
Very, very true. Reviews and critiques are important. They are necessary. But if they're not going to do anything beneficial and push us to
Correct.
do better, then we have to realize, okay, then that book wasn't for them. And this actually goes into a fan question that I used to have, but don't ask as much. Was there, tying into that, a moment where a reader left a review, but what they said kind of didn't match the story. Context for this one, a friend of mine who was another vampire, she's a vampire author. She wrote a story. It was marketed as a romance fantasy novel. It was not. It was a fantasy novel, first and foremost, that had romance plots in it. And the reviewers of that genre, romance fantasy, eviscerated her. Did you ever have an experience like that for any of your books?
Well, I had one, and it's the Moonlight Territory, and it was Wolf Within, and they were like, there are no werewolves in this book. I'm like, it opens with the werewolf in a book, and I'm like, what are you talking about?
Oh my gosh.
But when you say, those romance readers are serious people.
They are. Their genre is the most
Yeah.
read genre in the publishing industry. I think it's read 6 times more than any other genre in the publishing industry. And this has led to a discussion of, that the publishing industry is not just romance fantasy, it is other genres, but they don't get a lot of recognition and stuff like that. And this actually goes into another fan question, which I'm very excited to hear your thoughts on, which is, how do you build immersive worlds in your stories? And how do you weave themes into your narratives?
My world building comes initially from where I said it. Like I said, these books take place in Northern California. So I use what's around there, like Cascade Saga, Shasta Mountain is there. Well, mythology surrounds Shasta Mountain. And so I pull from there to, get the intrigue and the mystery or the mythology and creatures from there to, put out into their world. And then weave is just fun to, suspense, mystery, and the adventure of it all.
Yes, very, very true. And I definitely think themes don't get a lot of recognition in the publishing journey because almost everything is trope related. Which kind of leads into the next question, and it's more of an opinion question, Monica. Which do you prefer in stories, whether the stories you've written or reading as a reader, themes or tropes?
I like themes. I do love tropes too. There's a couple that I do enjoy, but I like themes.
Absolutely true. And follow up to that, do you think tropes, depending on how they're used, can be a hit or a miss in terms of marketing one's book?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I have in Cascade Saga, there are fated mates. Well, everybody has a fated mate. And so it's a trope. You have to create it and use it uniquely, I guess you could say, in order to make yours a little bit different than everybody else's. But if if you add fated mates, it's like, oh, it's another fated mate story. So
yes, absolutely. Again, very, very true, Monica. And this kind of leads into another discussion, which I think is very important. Because as we talked about all these different aspects of the publishing journey, whether it's, understanding our audience, understanding our voice, how we market our books, all that comes from trial and error, but it also comes from the people that we collaborate with and network with, which I think is very important to talk about. So for you, Monica, in your opinion, how important is it for authors, whether they're indie, hybrid, or traditional, to really experiment with networking, and not just networking with other authors, networking with editors, narrators, concept artists, and people who have backgrounds in marketing?
It's very important. And when I was writing my short stories, I was way more involved in networking because I was, obviously searching out different publishing places or magazines or whatever to submit my work to. As I started writing novels, I kind of backed away from that. And I do have editors and a wonderful book cover creator. Like I just tell her and she knows what she's supposed to do. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. And then bloggers, reviewers, anytime that you can get your name out there. I have a very small circle of people I work with simply because sometimes it's overwhelming.
We want to help one another, but we also don't want to pigeonhole ourselves
Right.
in either one style of writing or one genre or so forth. And this actually goes to another fan question, but it's an old one, which I haven't asked authors as much, which is who were the authors that readers have drawn comparisons to, and what would you say are the books and or authors that have really pushed you to be a better author?
I would say, since it's urban fantasy and romance is not the plot of the books, it is an element, but not the plot. Some of the books that they've been compared to is like Patricia Briggs, Laurel K. Hamilton, and writers like that. And then books to me, any book really is good. I'm a huge Robert E. Howard fan. And he was, and so if I'm going to sit down and read for a little bit, and I'm going to grab him.
Nice. I don't think I've heard of that author, which again is why I love doing these author interviews. They give me more authors to look into, more stories to add to my never-ending bookshelf. But honestly, looking around me, which you can't see, viewers and listeners, I am like closed in on like almost all three sides. It's a little scary, but that's why I love doing the show, because I get to read so many new books from so many incredible people, as well as shout outs to other authors to get them recognition. And speaking of shout outs, Monica, are there any people that you would like to give a personal shout out to who have helped you on your journey?
Like I said, my circle is small, and so there's not really many people.
All right. You mentioned before your cover artist, correct? What about, did you have like a editor that you've worked with, or did you kind of enter your books on your own?
Oh no, I have an editor,
No.
and she's good. She's good.
Awesome. Awesome. And here's actually another set of fan questions before I get to the final ones. And these are some of my favorites to ask authors. So in Bone Chimes, Monica, what has been your favorite way to introduce conflict into the story? And the add-on to that, how do you balance the action with the emotional depth?
How to introduce conflict? Me to introduce? I don't know how I do it, but it's really easy for me to do it. And especially if it's because it's emotional, conflicts are going to be emotional. And so one person is going to disagree with the other person. And because they can blow it out of proportion, conflict happens. And then and what was the second half of that?
The second part of that was balancing the action with the emotional depth.
Oh, I have to remind myself to back off on the action. So
Mhm.
that's very difficult. So I plan my action. And then that allows me, if in my head that's good, then I can work on the emotional.
Absolutely. And the last two fan questions, before we get to the very last question of this incredible interview, which I think are very important, especially for the business side of being an author, is of course understanding when to draw or write the ending. And I think it's very, very true for us as authors. So the first part of this fan question is this: Monica, how do you ensure that your endings feel satisfying? And ultimately, how do you know when a story is truly finished?
The ending for me, endings can be hard. I either nail them or I sit and stew about them. There's no, oh, this is going to be great. Um, try to end a book depending on what try to end a book so it goes into the next book, not a huge cliffhanger so it's off-putting, but just enough to tease the next book so you want an answer. And then and what was that other half of the question?
The other half was, how do you know when a story is truly finished? Because I think as authors, we want to continue writing, but when we are, let's say in this case, writing a series, we have to know, okay, I'm going to stop here because I don't want to keep writing because I
Right.
like the idea, and this could be a setup for a potential sequel or a trilogy.
Correct. I try to end mine. I always have some saying at the end of it Like for the last book in the Cascade Saga, it didn't have an ending forever. And again, I'm stewing about it. And I was like, this has to go. And finally I got to became the last chapter. And the things that happened in the last chapter ended. And I was like, it's an end. It's just at an end. So it surprised me more than probably it's surprised anybody.
Very, very true. And this is another question, which is a little more of a role play question. So imagine this, Monica. Let's say that you've been asked to give a workshop class at a book festival, let's say Festival of Books. And at that workshop, that call, you see that the room is filled with aspiring authors, horror writers, urban fantasy writers, what have you. And in the pool of topics to share and discuss, what is the one topic that you would like to teach or share to that room of aspiring authors?
I think the most fun I have writing is dialogue, is really getting into the character's head and then them trying to express themselves to somebody else or them keeping secrets from somebody else. So I love dialogue.
Nice. So you would pretty much teach in this hypothetical workshop class how to craft very engaging and immersive dialogue that really draws the reader into the world.
Correct. And draws the reader into the characters' heads.
Nice. Very, very nice. Well, we've arrived at the final two questions of this incredible interview, Monica, and here they are. So, with everything you have learned about the industry thus far, its highs and lows, some hiccups along the way, what is your word of wisdom to fellow authors listening or watching this interview right now? And ultimately, what do you want readers to take away from your books?
Well, first, for aspiring writers, if you have a passion for your work, don't let anybody take it from you. And it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. What matters is that you hold on to that passion and you follow it. Because if you don't, the only person who's going to get hurt is you. Nobody else can tell you what to do. And then for the readers, just enjoy, if I'm going to put a book out there, I obviously have spent time on it for adventure, for entertainment, all at the same time.
Absolutely beautifully said. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing, incredible author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Monica Kastle for making her official debut here on the show. Now, Monica, where can people find you on social media to reach out and connect, as well as buy copies of your books? And do you have any special announcements you would like to share with the viewers and listeners?
I can be found on X. I can be found on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. I have a website, castlenovels.com. I have the first book in the new series will be out hopefully by Halloween. And I'll also have a short story out by Halloween. And I will be back in LA next year.
Awesome. And viewers and listeners, be on the lookout for my eventual review of Bone Chimes, which I'll be reviewing and posting it on my website. So be on the lookout for that as well. And I will comment that down below, as well as link everything that Monica said in the description of this video. Thank you everyone again for joining us for another amazing, incredible author interview. A huge thank you to Monica for coming on the show, making her official debut. And if you would like her back on the show for a follow-up interview, comment down below and I will try to make it happen. And if you would like to see Monica in person, then make sure to reserve and save up for the LA Festival of Books 2026. She will be there. Many other guests will be there. Yours truly will hopefully be there. Fingers crossed if everything goes according to plan. If not, I will definitely be there showcasing and promoting all of these talented authors. So be on the lookout for that. And as always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And until next time, this has been the Wandering Tribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And have a wonderful Friday afternoon, everybody.